This is it. This is the B-29, the plane you've been waiting for. And it was worth waiting for. It's the biggest, fastest, mightiest heavy bomber in the world. It can travel farther and higher than anything else on wings. It has a pressurized cabin, permitting high-altitude flight without oxygen masks. It has 5 remotely controlled, electrically driven turrets, each carrying twin 50s, with a 20-millimeter cannon added to the turret in the tail. Yes, the B-29 is everything you've been promised.
The Boeing B-29 Superfortress, first flown in 1942, began active service in 1944, strongly contributing to turning the tide in the latter years of World War II in the Pacific Theater against Imperial Japan. Boeing engineered the B-29 to replace older B-17s and B-24s to incorporate the longer range and greater bomb loads necessary for Army Air Force operations to defeat Japan. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Air Force also deployed B-29s in the Korean War. This time, Air Force B-29s were based in Japan. This aircraft bomber served as a staple in the Air Force until the late 1950s, as the jet age came into full bloom. In all, Boeing and other manufacturers built nearly 4,000 B-29 Superfortress bombers in about 4 years. Few remain preserved today, with a scant 2 fully restored and still flying 70 years after the Korean War. Doc in Kansas and Fifi in Texas.
Fundamentally, all of us felt a little threatened by a war going on and the prospect of maybe being drafted. Some of my friends chose to wait and be drafted. Others, like I, went ahead and joined the military service. But I knew that I didn't have the physique to be an infantryman or something like that. I knew my talent was with my mind because I'd been well educated, and I wanted to use that talent to make a contribution to the war effort. I went through the aviation cadet program, which was very strict. We were drilled back and forth physically, but we were drilled also in such things as rolling up our socks, putting everything into a cabinet that was neatly placed, and everything had to be in the same place every day. This was discipline. Discipline is so important in a military life or in any life. You have to do certain things you may not wish to do. You have to organize your things and your thoughts so that you can be successful. I was a radar navigator. A radar navigator got you to and from where radar was necessary. And that was usually the case in Korea. I would navigate by radar. I also had the radar was an AN APQ-13. I can still remember that. We also had SHORAN, which was short-range aviation navigation. And that was a system we used in Korea, where they had towers set up 200 miles apart that would send signals back and forth. And with my equipment, I could zero in on where we were from.
Triangulation?
Yes, triangulation. Right.
Too.
I was in Japan from the 4th of July, 1952 until April 53. And oddly enough, they flew us over with a contract airline, California Eastern Airways. It was full of troops, Air Force personnel, and one stewardess. Still call them stewardesses back then. And it was crowded. We flew, our first stop from California was in Alaska, in the Aleutian chain up there at a base called Shemya. And we were there a short while, and then we flew on to Japan from there. Well, we stopped at Wake Island, and then Tokyo. But the total elapsed time of this flight from California was 37 hours. So we're all sleeping in our seats. The stewardess was lying on the floor sleeping because there was no other place for her. And we got to Japan. It was the 4th of July, and to my surprise, there were fireworks.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I never thought they would have fireworks in Japan.
Yeah.
And then very shortly, our crew was at Yokota Air Force Base and got some briefings and flew some missions. Our bombing flights, typically at that time, as I recall, there were 37 B-29s lined up to take off 1 minute apart. This is where discipline comes in. You're not a minute and a half later, you're 1 minute apart and the other guy's on your tail. And once we got airborne, typically we were up around 25,000 feet or more, and we separated by that 1 minute apart or half a minute apart and 500 feet in altitude. So we were stacked, and we flew from Japan over to Korea like that and back. So 500 feet in elevation and a half minute apart, and that was for our protection in case we were attacked by enemy fighters. And there was only one time that I'm really aware of where we were attacked, and I remember the senior gunner getting on the radio saying, bandit at 2 o'clock going from 2 to 5, which in other words he was coming around from our right toward our tail. And if he fired at us, I don't know, he didn't hit us. I don't think I could have done it without my faith in God. I always turned to God with prayer with every challenge, and there were a lot of challenges. When we would get into that airplane, B-29, with its 4 engines and 13-member crew, we all knew we were risking our lives, not just from enemy fire, but from accidental death. This happens. You read about it. I was aware of other planes in my squadron or wing which had been shot down earlier in the war. But we nevertheless climbed on board. We had a job to do. Each of us had a different job. Our part was to do the job that was given to us and do it well. Well, I was very fortunate in having a very good crew, top-notch pilot, and all of us performed enough to where we were appointed a standardization board crew, which meant that we were going to be used to train other crews, and that was something to be proud of. But we had incidents. We talked about flying being hours and hours of boredom with a few split seconds of terror. And I can remember a few of those things. Usually it wasn't so much because of enemy fire. We were attacked once or twice, but mechanical failure where one of the engines would give out. We lost one of our 4 engines 5 times in a 4-month period after the war had ended. That was the real threat to our safety. And our pilot, or aircraft commander we call him, in such occasions would tell us to get to our stations. I was in the aft end of the aircraft where there was a separate door. And we got as far as pulling that door open and waiting. And if things had not gone right at that point, we would have had to bail out with our parachutes over water. And wintertime, Pacific Ocean, in the area we were at, they told us that we'd probably last no more than a minute because the water was so cold. So that was something to think about. Once I got through aviation cadet program, I was a second lieutenant. And then I was a first lieutenant 4 years later when I got out. And I continued in the Air Force Reserves until 1960. So that's a total of, I went in 52, a total of 8 years I was in the Air Force, part of it as a reservist. It would be 2 weeks at a time. In other words, it was like a 15-day assignment. I had one 15-day assignment at Wright Pat Air Force Base in Ohio.
Hey Dad, this is a B-29 Superfortress called Command Decision, and Bobby and I are going to have the chance to walk through the fuselage, so he'll record me as we take a stroll through the fuselage of Command Decision. Right here, pilot, co-pilot.
Flight engineers panel. Sorry, do it again.
Obviously, quite obviously, the coordinates they carried.
Flying to the cruise tunnel. Luke.
Here I am at the Hagerstown Airport and about to get on a flight of a B-29 that my dad, Joseph F. Seng, a second lieutenant in the Air Force. So this is the commemorative Air Force here on June 12th, 2022. And Dad was a navigator on the B-29 flying from Yokota Air Force Base to do missions to fly missions over North Korea during the North Korean War. So very proud of Dad and thank Christine and my mom, Joyce Seng, for joining me today for the flight. And it's to be about a half-hour flight, I'm told. And I'll be sitting also in the navigator seat, so very inspirational. And we owe a debt of gratitude to my dad and all members of the service who defend our country's freedom. Thank you.
All right, my name is Al Banzing. I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth.
Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm the co-pilot today. Ben Powers, I'm flight engineer for the Dallas area as well.
Scott Wilson, Frederick, Maryland, just down the road. I'm your lead scanner.
Mark Gill, I'm your aft scanner from Haymarket, Virginia.
Dave Perkins from Keller, Texas. I am your left scanner.
So after this short briefing, I'm going to have everybody that has gunner on their tag go with Mark, and he'll give you another briefing. Take a shower.
This is a B-29 bomber, Fifi. Dad is on board. Dad is riding in the cockpit in the navigator seat in this B-29.
finished the flight satisfactorily. I made it back to tell the tale of the wonderful adventure for my first time in a B-29 that Dad flew on. I flew up with Dad's dog tags from the early 1950s, and it was very emotional and very much an honor to Dad's service in the Air Force.
Yes,
So,
very, 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 very nice day with good people.